Hello, everyone, and welcome back to History's Agenda. Tonight, we're speaking about back to our Founding Fathers series that we've been doing, President series, which any way you want to say it. Tonight, we're talking about last time it was John Adams, now his famous son, John Quincy Adams, his eldest son, who was quite a diplomat. He formulated so many things that became the Monroe Doctrine, which is something, strangely enough, is still very relevant today. I pretty much think he's the only founding father that ever had his picture taken, because he lived to 1848 and there were beginnings of photographs then. And of course, with us to guide us along in this endeavor is our good friend, the historian Jack Stanley. How are you, Jack?
I'm doing great. Good to see you. And yeah,
Nice to see you
you're
again.
so right. You know, a lot of times John Quincy Adams isn't described as a founding father, but I would definitely like to argue that fact. I think he was the youngest of our founding fathers because he had such a part in the American Revolution, which we'll get to, of course, as we start.
Well, you could argue he was a founding son,
Well, yeah, he
because he was
certainly
making,
was.
right, he was making at a very young age, he's making musket balls and doing all kinds of things and following his father around the world and being, his right hand man, as they say,
Yeah.
and made himself important, which is what we should all do in our life, is made them important to others. And that other person happened to be one of the originally founding fathers and crafters and presidents, second president. So
Yeah.
I'll leave it to you to start off this wonderful story.
He's an incredible individual. If I had to describe John Quincy Adams, as I described his father, I called his father the indispensable man. Well, this is the indispensable son because he did as much as his father did in many respects, and then went above and beyond because he had the ability to. But he was an author, he
Right.
was a botanist, he was a lawyer, he was a teacher, he was a politician, a diplomat, an ambassador. I mean, he did everything. I mean, you name it, he did it. And,
Right.
he had his own gardens and he practiced with various plants, trying to improve them. All through his life, he was involved with astronomy. He was involved in mathematics. He always studied religion and often argued against it. He also, interestingly enough, there's not one monument to the Adamses in Washington, D.C., to John Quincy, or Charles Francis, who is equally important, who is another person we should talk about eventually. But the thing is, there is a monument to John Quincy, and that is the Smithsonian Institution, which he was the one that pushed for its founding. That's an important thing.
Hmm.
That is truly a monument to John Quincy.
And he did that while he was president or another time?
No, afterwards. This was in the, I think the late 1830s, and
That original building that's there in
yeah, yeah,
Washington, which is quite a sight when you see it compared to the others.
yeah, the castle, as they call it. You know, the interesting thing
Yeah.
about John Quincy is he was born in 1767 to two individuals who are so important in American history, John and Abigail Adams. Could you find two more patriotic, involved individuals in the birth of a nation? I don't think you could. And from the time of his birth, he is educated, spoken to, involved in everything that is going on. And so he's taught constantly by his father. And by 75, think about this. He is running secret messages for George Washington in Massachusetts. he's sending out mail. No one's going to think about a little
Amazing.
kid carrying mail. At the age of 7.5, he's with his mother watching the Battle of Bunker Hill. That great battle that is very, very important. Actually, it was Breed's Hill, actually, but Bunker Hill's fine. Also, the thing is that during this time, the revolution is going by. They didn't know whether they were going to be taken over or they were going to be arrested or whatever. It was very, very troubling times. And John Adams is down in Philadelphia, trying to figure out what to do in the First Continental Congress and, of course, then the Second. But he was born in Braintree, as they called it then. It was later named Quincy. Of course, that's the way it's pronounced. I always watch these documentaries that they do, documentaries, excuse me, and they sit there and say Quincy. It's Quincy. That's the way it was pronounced. And you know something, right from his birth, he is working with his father practically. At the age of 10, he becomes his father's secretary. And they leave from Massachusetts and take a harrowing voyage across the Atlantic during the American Revolution. They hit terrible storms. They are attacked by a British ship. John Adams keeps grabbing a musket and wanting to go on top and fight. The captain keeps pushing him down. And while they were there, they survived together, and it was terrible. I mean, it's hard to explain voyages at that time. It took a month, and they went through terrific storms, and they finally arrived in Paris. And think about this. This is 1777 going into 1778. And this is the last days of Voltaire, and this is the kingship of Louis XVI.
Yes, an amazing time. Listen,
And you think about this.
Voltaire was something in itself.
Oh, yeah, well, he influenced so much. I don't believe John Quincy ever met him, but he was in that whole arena with his father.
Excuse me. Yeah, and he was, got on-the-job training there doing whatever he did. I mean, up till, I don't know, till he was from his 10 to he was 14. And I'm not even sure his father was aware of all the things he was doing.
Well, he was incredible. I mean, as I said, he was his secretary. Also, he was a translator. He spoke several languages already at the age of 10. Then he goes with his father to the Netherlands. And he is educated in the Netherlands for a while. Then he is sent into Russia to be a translator. Here's this boy traveling all over Europe, working with heads of state, translating and working and being a secretary to them. What an amazing education. And also, it had to be very, very hard on him.
Francis Dana, right?
I'm sorry?
Francis Dana was a diplomat sent to Russia, and John Quincy went with him as a secretary at that young age of whatever it was, 14, 15 years old. It's amazing.
Sure. And so he was traveling all over Europe doing a lot of this work, and then joining his father again, going to university there. Also, while being in Paris, he is being tutored by Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and his father. Franklin takes him all over France to see everything and explain everything to him. What an education this man had. And eventually,
he's there for the.
He's there. Go ahead.
He's there for the Treaty of Paris, right?
He's
there for the Treaty of Paris.
Survivor. He's the last surviving witness to the Treaty of Paris, of which his father, Benjamin Franklin, and John Jay are the signatories.
Amazing.
I mean, just to think what he saw. And then, of course, eventually they go back in 1788. They all head back. And John Quincy, of course, is in Harvard. and graduates from Harvard as well. And shortly after this, he becomes a lawyer with a practice in Boston. And then he gets his first call of duty. George Washington, President of the United States, announces that one of the greatest assets this country has is John Quincy Adams, and he names him our ambassador to the Netherlands. The Netherlands are very important to us because they were the ones that first gave money for our revolution. They loaned us $3 million. That was a lot of money. And we really cherished the Netherlands. And so whoever went to the Netherlands, it was very, very important we had the best. And that was John Quincy Adams. And that's the way George Washington put it. He is our greatest asset. After that, he serves in the Netherlands, is eventually relieved and returns. And then he becomes a congressman in Massachusetts. And then becomes part of the Massachusetts Senate. Then becomes a senator of the United States Senate in 1803. Now, while this was all going on, we have to remember that his father had been president, and it was an ugly time because we almost went to war with France. Fortunately, John Adams saved the nation from going to war. But Adams had a hard time dealing with Jefferson. Jefferson was a dear, loving friend when he was in Europe, but then he became somewhat of a political animal. And John Quincy Adams never felt comfortable being around Jefferson. And he supported Jefferson. He supported the Louisiana Purchase. Incidentally, John Adams, sitting in the sidelines in retirement, was also. But here's the interesting thing. John Quincy Adams was a Federalist at this time. And he was one of only 2 Federalists that was approving of the Louisiana Purchase. Pretty incredible. The Federalists hated him for this. And so he was a senator, but he resigned in 1808 because of political controversy. He had had enough. Also, a very important thing, in 1805, he becomes the first Boylston Chair of Rhetoric and Oratory at Harvard University. And he
Wow.
teaches there. I mean, very, very important. I mention this because those are important books that were written of these lectures here, which I'll put the first page up here so our viewers can look at this. This is the opening page of this. I don't know, does that come out all right?
A little bit. It'll clear up on another time. Yeah.
Now,
Can see it. Looks great.
These were written at the request of his students. His students adored him. And it's fascinating to read this, especially toward the end. It is a very emotional farewell to his students when he has to leave. The reason why he gave up his chair was that President James Madison had nominated him to be an ambassador. And he made him ambassador to Russia. He spoke Russian, which was fine. You got to remember, all the way back in the early days,
And
he had gone
probably
to
unusual.
Russia. Yeah. He spoke 8 languages, by the way.
Probably very unusual people to find somebody that spoke Russian at that time.
Yeah, yeah. As I said, he's an amazing individual. Probably the greatest intellect we've ever had as a president. I mean, he was truly incredible. So he is nominated, and of course he leaves Harvard and heads to Russia, where he remains as an ambassador until he travels down to become the head of the debating or negotiating group for ending the War of 1812. and they sign the Treaty of Ghent. Then he is nominated by James Madison to become the ambassador to Great Britain, the Court of St. James, which his
Right.
father had had. And of course, once again, just like his father, he's the first ambassador after a war. And so he deals with England and deals quite well. And then in 1817, he has to leave because he's been nominated by James Monroe as Secretary of State. So he travels back. I mean, he's all over. I mean, think about this. He has been globetrotting everywhere in an age where most people didn't travel 20 miles away from where they were born. Really quite incredible. And so from 1817 to 1825, he is the Secretary of State. And my God, what a Secretary of State he was. According to many histories, he was one of the best secretaries of state we have ever had. You know, as you mentioned in the start of this, people don't realize that he is the author of the Monroe Doctrine. He was instrumental in setting up a peace negotiation with Spain and gaining Florida. He did so many different things. It's incredible. It's quite surprising. And of course, in those days, being Secretary of State was the stepping stone to be president. Every individual who had followed Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of State was James Madison. James Madison's Secretary of State was James Monroe. And John Quincy Adams was James Monroe's Secretary of State. So he kind of looked at it like this was the nod. And boy,
Right.
that was a big, big issue because then you have the election of 1824. And that is so ugly. And you have everybody running, and everybody's from the same party. It's like an election here in Chicago. Basically all Democrats, you know, it's like, and the thing is that it gets quite ugly. There is something called the corrupt bargain with Henry Clay. John Quincy Adams, who keeps a diary, by the way, doesn't write in his diary for a couple of months, all during this period of time. So we don't know what he thought, what he did. And that's kind of interesting, actually, when you think about it. Who was the one that got most mad about all this? Andrew Jackson. And no one ever stood in Andrew Jackson's way, and John Quincy Adams did. And so Andrew Jackson said, if you are going to win the presidency, which he did through the House of Representatives, because there was no clear winner, Henry Clay put his votes toward John Quincy. Andrew Jackson said, you'll be president, but you'll never get anything done. And basically, that's what happens in his presidency. Everything he tries to do never gets through. It's terrible. Probably the most awful period of his life. But being an Adamses are stubborn. He runs for
And resilient.
re-election. Huh? I'm sorry?
And resilient. They're very
and
resilient.
Yes, indeed. And the interesting thing is he runs in 1828, and if you thought 1824 was bad, you ain't seen nothing yet. 1828 was probably one of the worst, terrible elections. I mean, just absolutely trash, tossed back and forth. Most of it from the Jackson team wasn't true. Some of the stuff that the Adamses threw out wasn't true, but my God, it was ugly. And of course, Adams loses, and Andrew Jackson becomes president. And Adams returns to the old house up in Braintree or Quincy and says, it's time for me to retire and die. He's really depressed. And people come up to him and say, you should support us and be a congressman for this area. And he does. He's the only president who takes a big step backwards and takes the lowly position of a congressman. And in those
Huh.
years from 1830 to 1848 are some of the most incredible things done by a congressman. That was his greatest moment. That was his greatest time. Because he did so much, and much of it dealt with slavery. He became an ardent opponent. He had always been. I mean, the Adamses never believed in slavery to begin with. But he became an
Right.
ardent opponent to slavery in Congress. There's a couple of things to mention. There's a lot of great books about this. But here's a book you don't see very often called Arguing About Slavery. And what this book is about, quite large, is about John Quincy Adams taking on the entire Congress. It was him against just about everybody else fighting over slavery. And the South, they hated him. And they tried to get him removed. He would get assassination attempts sent to him. They said, "We're going to kill you. We're going to hang you. We're going to shoot you." And the more they argued against him, the better he felt. It was like vinegar ran in his veins, and he was having a great time. And finally, he got into an argument with one of the various Southerners, and they said, "We are going to take you on and have you removed from Congress." And he looked back and said, "Good." And he got ready and he fought them and he defeated them just by brain power. It's really incredible. He was an amazing debater. And that's a part of John Quincy you don't hear about too much. Lots of other things about
Right.
him I wanted to share with you. He was friends with most of the people of the American Revolution, including Lafayette. And when Lafayette died, which an interesting thing about Lafayette, he came to the United States in 1824 and 1825 in a farewell tour. And of course, he met with John Quincy. He met with John Adams. Interesting little aside there. We went to the old house to see John Adams. He and John Adams sat there and talked for about an hour. And as Lafayette left, he looked to his friends and said, "That's not the John Adams I knew." Interesting thing, in the old house, there was old John Adams sitting there saying, "That's not the Lafayette I knew." They both said the exact same thing about each other. I thought that was kind of fun. It was
Well,
different
war
Lafayette.
changes everyone, right?
Yeah. But when Lafayette died, he had made a request of the United States that a cask of earth be sent to his place of residence from Bunker Hill. Because he laid the
Hmm.
cornerstone for the Bunker Hill Monument, by the way. And everybody
Really?
wondered why he wanted that cask of earth, this huge, monstrous thing of earth. When he died, his grave was filled with it. So he could be buried in his native France, yet surrounded by the earth of the other country he loved. Something that's not known too much. But when he died,
And
they
the other
needed,
country owes him
oh, we owe him
the
an
other
awful
country
lot.
owes him a great debt.
Yeah, indeed. An interesting thing to share with you here. This is an original piece. When Lafayette died, he was made an American citizen, an honorary American citizen. And they needed someone very close to him to speak about him. Who could have been closer than John Quincy Adams? This is the original. I don't know if that's there. I think that's better. His
Yeah, very
his
good.
talk before Congress in 1834 by John Quincy Adams. Says a member of the House. Doesn't even mention he was president. Interesting. Other things that he did in Congress, and I think very, very importantly, is in 1841, there was a slave ship that ran aground by New England, I believe, called the Amistad.
The
And
famous Amistad.
all of its occupants were arrested and people sat there and said, well, they're free. They should be free. And there was no one really successfully representing him until John Quincy Adams says, I will. And John Quincy Adams is 74 years of age at this point, and he writes in his diary, he said, my faculties are falling, my teeth are falling out, but I will represent the Africans. And he speaks before the Supreme Court for 2 days. All those members of the Supreme Court are mostly slave owners. And he gets their freedom. It's incredible. At the Adams homestead, there is, in the library that's there, that was built in 1871, there is a large Bible. And I was fortunate to see this. Someone showed it to me there. When you open up the Bible, it's a series of X's in the Bible. Those are the signatures of the Amistad slaves, thanking John Quincy Adams for their freedom.
Huh.
Really an amazing thing, He did,
Yeah,
as
it's a
I
great
said,
story.
he did so much. There's more. There's so much about him that I find so fascinating. I went through a lot of his diary. And in 2006, I decided to follow his diary a little bit. And I went up to what was called the Hancock Cemetery, which is where all of his ancestors are buried. And I wanted to figure out where he was, and I finally figured it all out. And he wrote in there, he said, 4 generations of my family are buried here. 3 are alive at this moment. 100 years hence, who of our posterity will come to see us? So I write a journal as well. And so I went to the exact same place, right where he was standing. And I wrote, your posterity is here. I thought it was something good to do, to let him know that that we remember. And I said that you are honored and you are respected for your work, etc. And I thought that was kind of cool. It was kind of fun. It makes history kind of fluid. You sit there and you answer a question that someone asked. It needed to be answered, and so I did. Other things that John Quincy Adams did, he was threatened with expulsion from Congress many times. You could not talk about slavery in Congress. There was something called the gag rule. And the gag rule
Right.
would not allow you to speak about the peculiar institution of slavery, as they called it. Well,
It was too volatile of a subject.
that didn't matter to John Quincy Adams. He would walk into Congress and says,
He wasn't.
I have a petition from a series of freed slaves, and the entire Congress would go nuts. And they'd say, string him up, remove him, fire him. And so
He does take after his father.
He loved every minute of it, because the angrier they got, the better he felt. And he did that on a repeated amount to it, got to a point where they had a vote whether to remove him. And he survived it. And he challenged them. You want to debate? Let's go. And he took on the whole Solid South and him. And he beat him. That's pretty incredible. And finally, in
At that time period.
1844, yeah, think about that. In
Yeah,
1844,
yeah.
he finally killed the gag rule. Think of that. What that did, and he knew what he did. He lit the match that went to the fuse that would eventually bring about the Civil War. And he said, this will bring about the Civil War, and when it comes, let it be the final battle of the American Revolution. Quite a man, quite an individual. Lots of other people were absolutely mesmerized by him. People were just surprised at his amazing knowledge, his association. When he would walk into the room, people realized that they were looking at the last vestige of the American Revolution. The last person to really around it knew Franklin, that knew Washington, knew his father, knew Jefferson. All of these people back in the 1770s and 1780s. And in
He remember
1846, huh?
he
Sorry.
was the only one around that remembered that they all still hated each other.
Oh, yeah.
I said he was the only one around to know that they all hated each other because,
Yeah.
well, I think, guys like Jefferson dug in and on their mind and really were different than what we remember
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
or taught to remember.
History, well, history has its protectors. The interesting thing, just to jump off of this just for a second, talk about history, is the fact that if you're writing a book about your hero, you're going to basically do your best to protect your hero.
True.
And if you find something in there that is really problematic, you're not going to include it. So a lot of historical biographies go through what I call the strainer of history. It's sort of like having a coffee strainer. You pour the raw history in, and just what's approvable goes through. The rest of that stuff is not touched. I always like the stuff that's not touched. It's much more interesting. But in 1846, John Quincy Adams had a stroke. And for several months, he was out of Congress. And finally, in 1847, he returned. And when he walked in the door, the entire Congress stood in recognition of who he was, what he had done, and what he represented. It's really an amazing story. I mean, he was not Mr. Love and Cuddles. He was rather stern. He didn't have a great sense of humor. He wasn't good at handling fools. He didn't handle fools well. He basically told them what they were. But get him in a group of people he felt comfortable with and give him a few drinks. He was fun. He used to get together with Daniel Webster and Dolly Madison, and they would sit there and drink and play cards and laugh the night away.
Yeah, well, he had to get Dolly Madison there because he needed somebody shorter than him in the room. And I don't know how tall Daniel Webster was, but
Well, Daniel Webster was probably about 5'8", something like that. Adams was 5'7".
oh, so he wasn't so bad. His dad was
No,
shorter though, right?
who? I think she was. Yeah, like 5'4" or something like that. It's an interesting
Uh-huh.
thing that's of two people that John Quincy knew who were constantly arguing and fighting was Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. They were both 5'4". You know, they always talk about Napoleon complexes. They were both two little guys. And, well, John Quincy Adams knew them. I don't think he got along too well with either of them, actually. Another thing about John Quincy, of course,
Well,
he did a great deal of writing. I mean, he wrote books on religion. He wrote books on botany. He wrote books on mathematics. He wrote books on measurements. He wrote things on astronomy. He actually traveled all the way out to Ohio to dedicate a astronomical observatory. And
so Andrew Jackson was 6'1", so they must have had some great battles with their height going on.
oh yeah, well, Andrew Jackson. Interesting thing about Andrew Jackson is he was the first president many people thought was going to die in office. Because, yes, he had been the rough, tough guy, but by the time he was president, he was extremely frail and extremely delicate. But he made it through. He was a stubborn old cuss. But when Adams was in Congress, he had the opportunity to have two people by him, very important. Abraham Lincoln and William Seward. Now,
Hmm.
Lincoln didn't know John Quincy Adams very well. He was very aware of him. He watched him. He saw him. He met him. But William Seward knew Adams very well. They became very good friends. And when Adams would die, and it's interesting, where would they find him in death? At his post. That's my phone is sinking down. He was in Congress in 1848. I think it was February 21st, I think. Somewhere right around there. February of 1848.
Hmm.
And he was arguing against the Mexican-American War, which he hated. He said it's ridiculous. He said it's a war of aggression. Well, no one agreed with him. Oh, Lincoln agreed with him, and that got him booted out of Congress, by the way. And the thing is that all through that time, William Seward was near him. And when Adams did die in February of 1848, he had a stroke on the floor of the house. They carried him into to a chamber, and there he would lay for 2 to 3 days before he finally died, waking up every now and then and being as eloquent as he always was. "'Tis the end of earth, but I am composed." He was known as Old Man Eloquent, and even in his death he was eloquent. But William Seward was so impressed with John Quincy that he basically became a devoted follower of John Quincy Adams. And in 1849, he wrote the book on John Quincy Adams. He also wrote the eulogy for John Quincy Adams. And John Quincy Adams said many things in his later years pertaining to slavery. He was fighting it, as we know. And he said, when the Civil War comes, and he knew it was going to come, he said, the way you free the slaves is by using the War Powers Act, because the South considers them property. That's the way you free them. You make it a military measure. And by golly, William Seward becomes Abraham Lincoln's Secretary of State. And the Proclamation of Emancipation, the Emancipation Proclamation, is a War Powers Act, freeing the slaves because they are property. Exactly what John Quincy Adams said. So much of what John Quincy Adams did was paving the roadway for the Lincoln administration during the American Civil War. It's amazing the influence, the actions, the work that he did. I mean, it is like beyond belief how much that man did in his lifetime. Yet, there is no public monument. There is no grand place dealing with John Quincy, nor his father. And as I said, the only monument to him is the Smithsonian. And most people don't realize that he has anything to do with the Smithsonian. That's a little bit of John Quincy Adams. There's so much
Yeah, I
more,
think
but
it's a
good
great
Lord, how
story.
long can you talk about it? I mean, but there's just so much about
No,
him.
I think we covered it great. I think that's an interesting part of when you look back in history is who is monumented and who is not, who is remembered for certain things and who is not. And that's just life. That's just life. It
And
just seems to be that
politics.
way. And you look at Yep, you look at the World War II monument, the raising the flag at Iwo Jima. There was a whole thing about the actual men that actually did that, and they made sure that this statue that mimics the photo blocks the faces of these men, so they're not individuals, but an act of a country, of a military and a
Sure,
group of people
sure.
trying to end tyranny in the Pacific.
And interestingly enough, that was the second flag raising. They did it once, but there was no photographers there. And it was a totally
That's right.
different group of
That's
people.
right.
And the original group didn't get any recognition at all, and I always remember a dear friend of mine who was an old Marine during World War II, he was there. And he said, I saw both. And he said, no one ever paid any attention to the first group. But one time, very quickly to mention to you, he was where that statue is in a tour bus with his wife. And
Right.
his name was Ray Stone, and he was an amazing individual and a great influence to my life. And he stepped out of the bus and looked at that statue, and everything came flying back to him. And he was standing there. And the bus driver started honking his horn and said, "Oh, man, get into the bus." And then his wife stood up and said, "He was there." And everyone calmed down. The bus driver stopped, and then there was a quiet reverence as Ray got back onto the bus and sat down. A lot of those stories we don't hear. But all of these people, all of these monuments are important. And I still believe, and there is actually on the internet, there is an Adams Memorial site to build a memorial. They're trying to get funding, and it seems to be very difficult. But if any of you have the funds like to put toward an Adams monument, look up the Adams Monument and toss them a few bucks. Maybe eventually, probably not in our time, but maybe in the future, there will be an Adams Memorial. And I can't think of a family
Maybe you
more
need to make a
deserving of
Broadway
it.
play out of it.
Yeah. I can't think of another family more deserving of it, really, if you think about it. And John Quincy Adams, as I
His
said when
face
I
his
began,
face is
I'm sorry?
his face is not even on any currency, right? Or coins.
Well, the presidential dollars, that kind of thing, but not on anything standard. But the interesting thing is, and I forgot what I was going to say. I was starting to say something to you, and it was important, but I don't remember what it was. Uh,
You were talking about statues.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But what I wanted to say, that's right. Okay, now I remember. When I started this talk, I wanted to present the fact that John Quincy Adams truly was a founding father. And if you think of everything that he did during the American Revolution as a secretary, as working with his father, translating, helping, working in the Netherlands, translating, he was his father's son, and he is just as important as many of the other founding fathers. And he was the last of that generation.
And he set the model for, American service to public service. I mean, how people operate in Congress, how people operate as secretaries of state, ambassadors,
Sure.
the importance and dedication to public service. I mean, he really is in the forefront of that. Nothing is about him, is about his personal interests. Everything is about public service, and it's really a message that I think is probably lost of his importance to that. So
Well, think about this.
I think that's a great place to end it. Oh, go
From
ahead.
the age of 10 to the age of 80, he was in public service. No one
Yeah.
will ever match that record. No one will ever match that.
And he took full advantage of serving the public interest of all the opportunities he had from his father, from Washington and ambassadorships, and whether he worked for whatever the guy's name was I said before, the ambassadors to Russia. When we talk about ambassador to Russia, you're realizing we're not talking about the Soviets here. We're talking about the czars,
Sure.
right? The
And he
the
was
Russian
a
Revolution
good
is
friend
until
with the Tsar.
1905.
Yeah. He was a good
So
friend to the Tsar,
it's
actually.
interesting.
He
So,
became very, very
and that's a
close
good place.
to
Go ahead.
many people in Europe. He became very close to many people in Europe. He used to go on walks with the Tsar. He would also exercise.
Well,
He was a proponent of exercise, and he would
it's
measure his
funny
steps.
because
I'm sorry?
when you think about when people say money is power, for him, relationships were power. He had an amazing ability to build and forge and unite relationships and do things. He really was a Renaissance man, even of his time.
Sure.
So
And he
I
was
think
known
that's a
as
good
a
place to leave it.
bulldog. He was known as a bulldog.
Yeah, like
No
his
one
dad.
No one who had to deal with him or debate him or deal on a treaty with him came away unscathed. He was a
Well,
tough negotiator.
but the difference between him and his father is his father was really liked. And I mean that he was really liked, not like his father, who wasn't really liked
Well, the Adamses
because he
were
was a little
never
more
known.
obnoxious.
Yeah, but John Adams had a wicked sense of humor. Unfortunately, that's something that John
That's
Quincy
true.
didn't have, but each one had their merits, each one had their abilities, and each was intimately proud of the other. I think that's where I'll leave it. And we're a
Okay.
lucky, lucky
Thanks so
country to
much.
have had them.
Absolutely. Think of all the things we have. Think of the Monroe Doctrine itself.
Yes.
So thank you very much, Jack.
Sure.
I look forward to our next one. This covered two things we've been wanting to talk about. One is to really dive into the presidents and also into the founding fathers. And we may take the liberty to say this is a founding son.
Yeah,
So
I would agree.
thank you so much, Jack.
Sure.
Thank you, everybody. Like and subscribe. If you're interested, please give us your comments. Anything you'd like us to talk about, please do. Thanks again. Thanks, Jack.
Take care.